achterneef van Albert McKenzie, een van de jonge Britse matrozen.
Albert particularly was a very keen, enthusiastic sort of chap. He was a champion boxer in the Navy. He was a fighter, and they'd been sitting around waiting for something to happen for several years, and I think this was his opportunity to really get involved.
Op 11 april 1918 was het zover. Samen met Colin leg ik dezelfde weg af als zijn achterneef toe. In het kielzog van Albert varen we met een patrouilleschip van de Belgische marine terug naar Zeebrugge.
So here we are, finally, the 11th of April. They can set sail for Zeebrugge.
Well, they've got nearly 70 vessels, all assembled in the right position. They're making their way across the channel. There's no moon that night. The wind's in the right direction. Everything's going to plan. And then suddenly, the wind changes direction. This means that the smokescreen that they're going to lay in front of the fleet to cover their approach will be blown away. And
so they'll be in full view then.
So then they'll be in full view of the Germans as they approach the mole. So Admiral Keyes has to make a decision. Do they carry on with no cover, or does he call the operation off? It's a huge decision to make with all this fleet in position, but he makes that decision and he says, right, we're calling the operation off, and all the vessels have to turn around and return to port.
Surely they didn't call off the whole thing, so there must have been a second attempt.
Yes, there was a second attempt. 2 days later, they set sail again, but this time a storm came up and they had to cancel the operation again, and all the vessels went back to port for the second time.
So all this time the sailors would have to sit around and wait.
Yes, the sailors all went back to Chatham docks. They were all squashed like sardines back into the home vessel, and they had to wait there. And I should imagine that the tension must have been incredible, not knowing that at any minute they might start the whole operation again.
So tell me, after all this bad luck, when was the final attempt?
So they finally set sail on the 22nd of April, and they were due to arrive on the 23rd of April, and Admiral Keyes realized 23rd of April is St. George's Day, the patron saint of England.
That's a great symbol.
And so from his flagship he sent the signal, St. George for England. I found some wonderful accounts written by some of the men that took part in the raid. And I'd like to just read one of them to you, if I may. It really hit us when the number one ordered us to cover the deck with sand to soak up the blood. Later we watched the sunset. Everyone was very quiet. I think we were wondering if we would ever see it rise in the morning.
So here we are, 22nd of April, and then the raiding party finally arrives at the port of Zeebrugge.
About 1:45 to midnight, everything had gone pretty well to plan. It was dark. There were fast motor patrol boats laying a thick smokescreen here in front of the Vindictive and the other vessels. There we can see the mole with the lighthouse just on the end. There were German guns positioned all along there. They could obviously hear the vessels in the dark, but couldn't see them, didn't know exactly what was going to be happening. On the port side, we could see a dark mass looming large through the fog, and we knew we were nearing the mole. The excitement was at fever heat, and our nerves strained to the utmost. The silence was appalling. And then suddenly, the wind changes.
Whoa.
The wind starts to blow off the land, and the smoke screen disperses.
There's no more cover, so there they are in full view then.
Absolutely.
And still all the way to go.
They've got another 300 meters to go, and now they're in full view of the German guns. Then all hell broke loose. The German guns opened fire.
Where was your Uncle Albert at that time?
Well, he was on the deck of the Vindictive. He was one of the raiding parties. There were ramps along the side of the Vindictive waiting to be lowered onto the mole, the harbour wall, and there were 12 ramps. In the first outbreak of fire, 10 of those ramps were destroyed, and 50 men were killed. It sounded as if someone pulled the props from under the sky, and I fell down. These thundering and banging and ear-splitting sounds continued, and even then we could hear the wails of anguish of the wounded and the dying.
So here we are, finally, just like they were, approaching the gates of hell.
Absolutely. We're now right up against, you can see up against the side of the mole here, and you can see how intimidating it is. The whole of the top of the mole there would have been raked by German fire, and the problem was that the Vindictive was lower in the water than they had planned, and there were only 2 ramps usable to lower down onto the top of the mole to get the troops on. The first thing is they couldn't get the grappling irons hooked onto the mole to pull the Vindictive in. So there was a quick change of plan. The ferry Daffodil moved round and acted like a tugboat and pushed the Vindictive in against the side of the mole here and stayed there pushing the Vindictive in. When the ramps were lowered, they should have been at this sort of angle, but in fact, because of the height of the deck, they were at that sort of angle. So it was a very difficult task to get up a ramp carrying all that equipment. And the whole time, the Germans were firing. The whole of the top of the mole here was raked with machine gun fire. So it was really, as you said, like stepping into the gates of hell.
And Albert was waiting all the time to get on top of the mole.
It took 15 minutes after the Vindictive arrived here at the mole before they could get the first troops up onto the mole. And Albert was one of the first to arrive on the top of the mole. The water on the mess deck was no longer water. It was a mixture of the blood of British seamen, their heads, arms, legs and trunks torn to bits, mixed up with food and mess utensils. I can't ask you to imagine this. You couldn't. This reclaimed land here was all sea at the time. The Vindictive is here up against the mole. You can just see the superstructure with the crow's nest, with the machine gunner firing, and the Germans then were in a destroyer here, moored on the other side of the mole. They were firing directly, only about 100 meters away, directly. So this whole area was sprayed with machine gun fire. So Albert appears up one of the 2 ramps to the left, carrying his Lewis gun, jumps onto the top of the mole here, onto this parapet.
And what was he supposed to do once he got on top?
So the first thing is to get off this area, which was just a death trap, and they had to either jump down here, either on ropes or on ladders that they had with them, or they used some of the ladders that were here, down onto the base of the mole to engage the Germans. And of course there was a huge fighting the whole way through this operation.
Ondertussen nadert, zoals gepland, een kleine Engelse duikboot zo goed als onopgemerkt het viaduct dat de mol met de wal verbindt.
We ran right into the middle of it and stuck there as intended. I do not think anybody said a word except, "We're here all right."
Was the attack with the sub successful?
Yes, the attack with the submarine was successful. It exploded underneath the viaduct which connected the mole to the mainland. That cut off the electricity and the reinforcements, so there were no searchlights, so the people on the mole couldn't tell the mainland what was going on.
And in the meantime, there was still fierce fighting going on here.
There was fierce hand-to-hand fighting. Down here on the mole, you can see that the 40 or so troops that managed to get off the Vindictive and actually engage the Germans were here engaged in very heavy fighting. There were several hundred troops on the Iris and the Daffodil who were meant to get onto the mole, but they couldn't get up onto the parapet.
So Albert was here pretty much on his own.
It was a very small number of troops actually engaged in the fighting, absolutely. So then Albert was wounded in the foot, and then he was wounded in the back, but he carried on fighting the whole way through that. But eventually, when the signal was given, they had to withdraw. Luckily, Albert's friend, his colleague from the Lewis gun team, managed to carry him all the way back here onto the parapet and back down onto the Vindictive.
And all this was just a diversion?
This was just a diversionary attack. The whole object of the exercise was for the block ships that came in here just through the end of the mole, across here, into the canal to block the canal.
Als dat lukte, zaten de Duitse onderzeeërs in de val. Maritiem archeoloog Thomas Termote toont mij hoe de raid verder verliep.
Ginderbovenop de Mol wordt er hevig gevochten en ondertussen varen hier aan de voet van de vuurtoren de blokschepen de haven binnen. So tell me, what happened to young Albert when he got back?
Well, Albert was chosen by his shipmates to receive the Victoria Cross, to represent all of them. And he went to Buckingham Palace and received his medal from the King in the summer. And then in October of that year, sadly, he died in the Spanish flu pandemic, aged just 19.
And that was it?
And that was it, sadly, yeah.
Do you think, looking back, that it was all worth it?
Well, nobody has got more admiration than me for Albert and for his bravery, and I'll do my utmost, and have done my utmost to keep his memory alive. But if you say, was it worth it for all those young men to be killed, British and German, no, I couldn't possibly say that. O England, mourn thy gallant sons, marines and sailors too, who died like paladins of old, to king and country true. But dry thy tears, for every age their glory shall extol. So when you hail St. George's Day, remember Zeebrugge's mole.